So we've got like, I think, around 45 minutes to have a collective thinking around the idea of place, movement, and technology. There's a lot that has been said, and there's a different thread that we can go with. I think I've got a lot of questions, but I might start by opening up to the artists and potentially if you want to ask each other questions on the different projects that have been presented. Here is Vicky. We can see her now. So maybe we start with that. Vicky, do you have any burning questions that you, or comments or things that came to you, because you launched this event today, so I was wondering if.
Yes, thank you. I do. I have loads of burning questions. I don't know where to start.
Start with one.
Okay. Thank you. Amazing to share the work with everyone today. Thank you so much. I've learned so much, and I'm really excited. I have a question for the. I really enjoyed the body data project, and I thought that was really interesting in terms of the sense of identity, because I deal with diaspora identity as well. And then I've got a second question for the last presentation with Zach. So I'll start with the body data one. Thank you. How do you actually envisage the sort of later impacts? I understood that you're collecting data and you're trying to get a sense of engagement with the experience, but in terms of what happens, because I'm really into the digital traces that are left behind, and then also the community traces, which is my question for Zach. But how do you kind of envisage other possibilities for moving forward with the project in terms of how would others connect with the collective experience, not just as a micro individual, and in terms of the relationship to our multiple identities as we express that in today's social context of digital media for all of us? Because my parents are also refugees, and I've inherited their stories, but through different layers of storytelling, and I get that through folklore and myth, or lamentation songs. It's not necessarily a political geography now, but I've inherited histories of political geographies and displacement and loss. So I'm thinking, for those who now experience it, how can we then sort of access that in a positive way of what we can use politically within ourselves and socially?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Vicky. So that's, I guess, something that I kind of touch on in this kind of the reflection of the work. So there is a kind of understanding of how I call it this concept of choreographing evidence. So how in any kind of performative context, how we can navigate and kind of reorganize space in a way which leaves these traces and leaves these kind of digital but also very physical traces of multiplicities and of those kind of multiple identities. So this idea that through a kind of recalibration with the spaces that we're working in, and within Contagion, that's a kind of rewriting of place through this shared walking experience, but also within another piece that we've done together called Uninvited, it was this Tom did this wonderful durational walk through the sand where he draws this kind of almost like a borderline which is captured by a drone, and this idea of kind of remapping and redrawing borders. So this sort of tactile, perhaps not always visual, but very much kind of connected to place and space, this idea that we can recalibrate that how space is organized and how the narratives within those spaces are seen and kind of developed. So I think that's something that can be done in a wide variety of contexts, but also there are lots of challenges that are presented within that. So I guess just kind of the awareness and the understanding that so for example, the app itself it got rejected from the App Store because it doesn't have enough benefit to the user, which is great because it's a kind of this strange failure that is the success of the app. So this sort of understanding that there's sometimes, you know, you get these blocks that don't allow the project and the work to be seen in the spaces that you want it to be seen in, but actually that completely reifies the purpose of the work. So it kind of goes round in circles, but I think just this understanding that, yeah, there are opportunities and challenges in reorganizing space in that way. And I don't know if there are answers there, but
that is interesting, because it sort of made me think about your work, Zach, and the kind of boundaries and the thing of it being inside and outside, and sometimes being forced to be outside, but that is where the work is as well. And that's really,
it's disruptive. I think I like it's disrupting or changing, you know, like your ability to go and do things in places in and of itself, that doing something in that space, in that particular place, makes people, and believe me, the amount of people I've had come around, like I've had people try to steal my laptop and my projector while I was doing it in front of the job center, in fact, with the artistic director of City of Culture next to me. And there was also everybody else that didn't try to steal my laptop. But he was like, what are you going to do? I'm like, I'm going to tell him no. Like, you can't have my laptop. You have to go. There's no way you're taking my things right now. And you also have people who come in next to you and stand there, go, I remember my grandpa used to work at this place, or my grandma used to work there. And that's like, that action, you know, it's taking the practice outdoors and doing it physically is where you get people going, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Why is this here? What's it for? Why do you care about this place? You know, and us then going, oh, well, we've heard a lot of stories. So I think when you say like just being physically in, that in and itself is an action. It's there's curiosity. You know, I think most of our work and most of the things I make reward curiosity, and I'm interested in that. But you have to do stuff. You have to make things happen. You have to physically get out there to do that. You know, and making an app, that is a physical thing as well. It's just, I guess I'm a fan of producing. I'm a fan of making things. What comes of it, but like keep trying to physically make things happen, and then you have response, and then you can respond to that response. And you get it wrong, you piss people off, and people don't like you, and they tell you to fuck off, and that's cool. Like, that's part of the process. But don't be, you know, don't be discouraged, I guess, by that. But be like, when they block it, you're like, right. So now I have to figure out how to make it have them interpret it being useful, but not give away the thing that I'm trying to. Yeah.
There is one other thing which I think is sort of, I loved the issues that you were talking about, and in some ways it is a triumph when they say no, there has no value in an app store. Well, but there is an issue about the nature of data. You know, we have a kind of a socio-cultural nature of how we treat data from dance and, you know, social studies. Well, not social studies, but dance and creative industries. Whereas when you look at data, it's usually, when you collect data, it's individual bits of information that can be useful for something. So in some ways, you know, if you go onto an app store and it's free, then you become the product. If you buy it, then there's a contract. You can say, they'll say to you, well, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. But if you're gonna sign up and it's completely for nothing, the contract is that you're the product, because they're collecting your data and they're going to use that in some particular way. And that's what we sign up for. And so there is a kind of industry understanding that data, our biological data, our behavioral data, anything that is to do with banks, anything to do with all of that is information that can be utilized in some way. So when we talk of data, the question then becomes, for what? Now, of course, in the creative, and this is what's interesting, is like we say, well, there isn't a for what. It's about expression and presentation and transparency, which isn't necessarily about a for what, or that is what it's for. So there isn't a kind of utility. There isn't a kind of a marketing.
There's no financial
financial value.
value.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
And that's absolutely, we have to ask. So the experience that we're trying to create that involves that interactivity and involves that perspective, we have to have all their permissions and all their data. We aren't going to keep any of it. It's all an experiential, but they have to give us their camera, their light, their haptics. They have to give us their location. Because for it to work, we have to have every bit of data that the phone is taking in so that we can make the best experience for them. So we have to say at the beginning, you have to give us everything or else it's not going to work. But you don't have to give us everything. You know, it's not a pressure thing. It's definitely, but I think the language, I really like the language. And I think the way that so many terms and contracts are made so they're not, you have to have a period to read it and understand it.
I suppose it's a question, isn't it? It's a question about whether that data is collected in a way that's individually identifiable, or whether it's aggregated,
Yeah.
which you know one can understand in terms of like the commercial or sociological benefits to which that might be put in mainstream use. I think it's quite possibly quite an interesting line in terms of artistic projects as well. What's the differences between a project which like in your case might use somebody's image projected 40 foot high, and it's very clear that individual likeness is going to be used, and where are there other projects where somehow we can draw on an aggregated data on a kind of notion of the collective which would exist in in a physical audience. I don't know if people have examples of things which are drawing on that. I don't know if your app, for example, you records people's journeys over a time.
Yeah, so that is the function of the app. So the idea is that although you put that information at the beginning, it's it's discarded, and then the only thing that kind of remains from the journey is that walking data, and that kind of the sort of little infographics at the end. They go round, and the more that people use the app, the more that kind of collects into this one thing. So yeah, it is this idea of the collective rather than individuals, and I think that was the kind of purpose of subverting that normal GPS usage, where it sort of targets one person in one space. And again, that's got kind of militaristic and those sort of historical backgrounds of what GPS was intended to do, in its kind of conception, and actually how that then is translated into this app, where the kind of it's the target is actually lots of people who have collectively kind of contributed to this thing. So yeah, their data in that sense has a kind of value to us as the creators of the app, and that contributes to the contagion. So yeah, that's a really interesting.
And I think the concept of contagion is both literal and allegorical, isn't it?
Yeah.
When I was in Japan, I was working with Johannes Firenze. We were working with a Japanese Buto group, and we went to. Of course, Japan's like 5 years ahead of the world. I mean, they're just ahead. They're designing things, and then we went to this museum, interactive museum, and what they were using was biological data, GPS data, to visualize objects, so you get a kind of direct feedback. So it reminds me of something that you're doing in some ways, anyway, where you put your hand on this particular object and take your pulse, then that pulse would be translated into a visual pulse image, and so then you get excited, and of course it gets faster, and you're like, okay, and then so you have this direct, almost transparency. Now that was just the kind of the purpose of taking the data was for the feedback. It was direct feedback, and of course your emotions are manipulated as a result because of a mirrored reflection, a bit like the kind of narcissistic idea of you suddenly see yourself and get excited, it's copying, and then you try and relax. It's relax, it gets slower, or it changes the color. And there was other ones where you'd go onto the floor and it would map your GPS coordinates. But then, so as you move, it would translate that miniature space, well, not miniature, it's quite a big space, into star constellations. And so you have this kind of as below, so above sort of situation. Again, this sense of direct feedback, it's all geared towards self-awareness or self-reflection. And it just made me think a little bit about what you're doing, which interestingly isn't commercially useful, but actually it's utilizing data. It's actually saying, okay, no, this is, if you're looking at data, here's data being utilized for self-awareness.
There's sort of the inverse, which that reminds me of is there's a project it's by an American woman whose name I can't remember, which is it's a it's a servo-controlled kind of corset which responds to the air pollution levels in the air. So as you move through the city, the data in the city is then translated into these the movements of this garment that then restricts your breathing, so that you physically affected by that kind of geographic thing.
The most interested in our idea anybody's ever been is a business person who thought what you're trying to create, take away the specific art and put together an app that could enable everybody to interact with a live performance. So if they went to see a live gig, they could choose the color of the AR content or the lighting in one spot. And he immediately was like, yeah, if you've got all that information, then you can send them special deals and all the marketing. Like, for sure, his brain was like, this would be the best thing ever. Then you'd have direct access to everybody and you could get all their stuff. You could give them all the information and take all them. And we're like, no, that's not what it's about. But that's the business, you know, and the only people that are interested in what we're doing is from a business perspective, how to manipulate and take as much away from that. And we're just like, that's not what it's about. And we're not going to be the people who do that. There may be someone else who takes the idea and does that, but it can't, like, on our conscience, that's not going to be us who starts that process, you know. But there's probably a middle ground where you don't, you know, there's a middle ground where you don't permit, there's permission, you know, you do not allow that part.
That's the problematic, I think, of technology, because it does need money and
totally.
a lot of money, and to push those research ideas in practice and money. You know, I've got a colleague that say she's follow the money. You know, if you want to see money is attached to different ethical practices. So how do we negotiate that, you know, as artists, as producers, to find a way to use to kind of push the technology where we don't exactly know what's going to be the outcome, and if it's not used well, as we have as history has told us, we can actually destroy and get into that. So transformation, in that sense, the limited that Vicky was introducing, can get to that point of destruction. So it's quite, you know, it's quite a deep.
It is, and it's we're at a point where it's going to happen one way or the other.
Yeah.
So what we're keen to be a part of is how to tell that, how to do it well, and how to do it morally, and how to do it with integrity. So there's an example of how it can be done to make an incredible experience and not take advantage of people. But you know, no one's funded it. So you know, like we'll see about it. And I'm not being dismissive about the whole, like, it's just it's been a hard couple of years, you know. So we are in a situation that's different slightly. But I think it's worth us as creatives and people who aren't trying to take advantage to exercise and to figure it out, and to then be the ones that maybe also have some advisory positions within it because of our experience and because of our knowledge, and be able to then say to them, if you're going to go about it this way, this is a process by which you are getting consent and by which you can do it so that people know what you're doing. And that's an obligation you have to anybody that's using this or for taking part. You know, there's ways of going about it. I don't know all the answers, but I know that for us, it's definitely like, we're going to ask for everything, but we're going to tell them why. And then we're going to say, all this stuff isn't for us to keep. It's for us just to have for the experience. We throw it away. That's not like in our user experience and our development, it will be necessary to understand those things and the way it's used. But actually, in terms of what it is and what it's used for, we're not going to give it to anybody. You know, I think I don't even know well enough. Our creative technologist does, whether we save it somewhere or we can completely destroy it. Can we completely destroy it? You know, all those things are a bit.
You know, they get updated every time, so like
Yeah,
you
yeah.
have to.
Yeah, and yeah,
It's a difficult choice with a reduction in public funding that seems to be emerging, and that compromise you then make with business or sponsorship, and how you draw those boundaries of ethics, etc. It's going to be right at the forefront, I think, in the next 3 or 4 years.
And also to add to that, there's a train crash about to happen, which is when you have AI doing majority of the jobs that used to be a ladder for most people to get to the next rung, that's taken away. It's not like the population explosion is suddenly getting smaller. What do you do with human activity? What does that actually mean now? And you know, people. So you have this thing, and again, from an African point of view, we, you know, you'd appreciate this, where there is in the West, there's an overemphasis on what things look like, the kind of shape and form of a thing. And so it's like, oh, the robots, the AI can now write poetry. And of course, immediately I sort of do that sort of thing that dogs do when they're quite confused. Because essentially, how is it poetry? What is its inner, what is its inner life? It's a calculating thing. It's an algorithm. There's no meaning for itself. It's not self-referential.
it's referring to everything else, not itself.
It's not itself, exactly. Yeah. So it's like me sitting down in front of a cloud and thinking, oh, that cloud looks like an elephant. It's fantastic. You know, now what does that mean? Does that mean I'm sitting down in the clouds again? Oh, Ollie's sitting down, but let's go and arrange some elephants so you can perceive it. You know what I mean? It's just things that's calculated. It's a kind of, and so what then happens is where human activity comes in is self-knowledge, self-understanding, and well-being, and actually asking that question, what is it to be human? Which an algorithm can give you, because it's going to, but it's not going to know whether it's good or not. It's just going to say, these are the options. It's us we project onto that.
That's so that one of the threads that I picked up from all of your presentation is that relationship, you know, obviously to the body, but also to self-reflection. And I think, Vicky, you were mentioning that at the beginning. You started with, you know, my work is about being present, being with, being present, and that relationship with offering people a way, a space, a time to self-reflect, to evaluate, you know, the impact as well of the technology. We are all cyber, you know, got a couple of Alexas in my house. It did change my way of communicating with people. But that relationship with the like you're saying, we are in a representation. We have been, you know, that's been the paradigm, and now it's this sense of what is our well-being, how is this well-being also supported by technology. But you know, I'm conscious that there are students as well in the audience here, and you know, one of the things that we try to do with our dance students is that they can self-reflect on their use of their body, And I think that's why dancers are the heart of a lot of development of technology, and because they have that intelligence of how the body can reflect on the self as well, and articulating that is sometimes difficult for dancers, yeah, because it's not our first mode of communication, but I just wanted to bring back that sense of self-reflection and the body, the embodied self-reflections. And it's not very well funded, it's true, because it doesn't have a direct use, because we're still in that sense of representation. So again, maybe in the project that you guys are involved in, how do you negotiate being with a kind of project-based time as well? It's, you know, beginning and end, potentially also having to do reports on what's happened, and the sense of outcome, you know, what you're going to actually, what's going to be shared at the end. And then all of that with that sense of similarly than John, I have a kind of it's not necessarily a question of age, but I have a dual relationship with technology. I love it and I hate it. And as a mother, I hate it because it changed the way my relationship with my child. But in the same time, I can see that this is how she's developing. This is important to her sense of belonging. So, you know, there's that negotiation between, I think it's a bit like Marmite, isn't it? Love and hate with technology, but also not being able to escape it. So coming back to building communities through that tool, and what is then the next thing, what you bring from one, you know, there's this lovely image of the river that I absolutely love, because for me, walking, picking up things, the river is picking up things that it goes, destroying potentially as well. There's that sense of reflecting in the water, about the lovely image of that future project that you have, where water is, you know, 70% of our body is made of water. Sense of place within that, you know, transformation and renewing, and going into different places. I don't know exactly if there's a point, but it was just a kind of thread that came through, and how do you know, that sense of challenges that we have with technology, that we have to live with it. You know, it might save us as well. There's a sense of survival. That is at the same time a real challenge to the body, to the materiality of the body, to being with. You know, which you saw it today at the beginning of the symposium. It took us a while to actually be together because we were trying to enmesh the technology within it, which is then allowing us to communicate with Athens, to potentially record this conversation so that we can distribute it to a wider audience.
I think it's analog and digital. You know, like my whole life is analog and digital, and where they meet. And that is what I'm interested in. And the body is analog. And, you know, like that is the primary analog thing we have. And then so many tools we have now are digital, but it's not, it's where those two meet, cross over, and make something different. That is really interesting. Not one or the other on its own as much as the two together. Like I love dance. I love the I love the body as in I love watching dance. I love performing. I love dancing like to electronic music. You know, a lot of the time if I'm going to be dancing or rock music, whatever. But that's like like those two things. Someone on stage playing music to you. You could have a guitar. You could have like a kora. You could have something that's a technology, but not a digital kind. But that combination is just incredible. You know, it's just what's vital, I think.
And the combination and then the relation, that's what creates life for your work. When you're thinking about just one thing, like there is one idea challenging, like when I'm talking with people, really challenging. I see everything as a whole sometimes, most of the time. And I end up like getting misunderstood. But I think that is what it is, that this is the whole thing, that we're just looking at the physical objects, as you were expressing it, and then scary. Because it's the first time, and we're artists, we're not like engineering or because engineers, what they have to do, the technology when they before they become engineers. But as an actor, I don't have to do it. I just can't acting, Shakespeare style acting, and I could be an actor. That's it. And this comes, and I think the relationship, the decision with before you go there, as you see, you have a decision. You're gonna, you know what you how you're gonna use it.
I think it's looking at it as an opportunity.
Yeah.
And that opportunity is also to say no, as much as it is to say yes all the time. You have an opportunity to say no, I'm not interested. Don't want to do that bit. And where is it interesting, and what can be gained? You know, I guess that's how I also have a kid, and I also have technology in my house. And like, for instance, if he wants to watch the iPad or play or draw on the iPad, I'm like, cool, but you also have to do that much time drawing or physically making something with your hands. You know, it's like, because that's not more important. They're all things you want and that you're interested in, but they both have the validity, and you have to be aware when you're being usurped or sort of taken over or told what to do. And that I feel is like the most present thing we can do. It's just be present and be like, just make decisions, not be told what to do. You know, in so many aspects of our life, we're just like, oh, just sign this. It's really easy. I don't need things that are easy. I don't need convenience particularly. I want to do things physically, and I'm happy to do that. I don't mind working. But people, I think, have this idea that working or being inconvenienced by things is a bad thing. But like, being bored as a kid is when you have the most that's when you're creative. That's when your imagination. And I don't know if that's particularly going off, but I think there's something to not having that is really useful.
Simon?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with your point about that sort of analog and digital, and the interesting point being about the meeting between the two. But also, I wonder if there's something that actually happens over time with the evolution of the technology and the way that we work with it. And I think the example of the synthesizer playing on stage with the guitar and the drum kit is a really kind of good example. And that actually, when synthesizers were introduced, they were something that was, of another world, of a digital world that would take away from the analog world. And I think kind of we are on this journey with technology. I sort of feel like I sort of a bit kind of Mulder out of Mulder and the X-Files-ish about this. And so I want to believe that, like, over a period, this technology, like this technological point which we're at the moment, replicates other technological points in that things become cheap enough, become ubiquitous enough, and become intuitive enough for them to find their way into the hands of artists, and not just people obsessed by creating data sets to exploit by for commercial purposes. And it's actually that point where you can get good cheap, but you know how to work with that. What African musicians have done with synthesizers and electronics, for example. But it takes that time for it to pass into a world where people can play and experiment with it. And I can think of so many obstacles to that, but I hope that is that's a journey that we're on, that it's not necessarily just this binary choice between analog and digital. Actually, what we have is it's an engagement between the two, which becomes richer and more interesting.
I think if we
on an optimistic note,
if we can encourage our education system and our artistic practice within this new paradigm to completely utilize and relearn the whole sensorium of the body.
you say sensorium.
Sensorium, yeah. So the seat of sensation completely. There is an ocular dominance in the West. Eyes, I mean, even Google, I mean, they're not even hiding it. Google itself is a kind of a reference to just being looking and searching with your eyes. And it just strikes me, I mean, I've got some friends in the special forces, and they're saying to me that when they get put behind enemy lines, particularly in the bush, they spend a month not using aftershave, soap, not having any kinds of coffee, just having water. And then they take these particular drugs to make their stools really, because when they go out into behind, they want to be able to not leave any scent. Whereas you get some people, especially in the Vietnam War, there was lots of people down there after shave. You know, of course, they, you know, the Vietnam could smell them 2 miles away, and because they don't think that's even an issue. It's like, yeah, I'm just doing my thing, but actually they're just giving their positions away. But because we've lost the ability to really use our smell, our sense of skin, you know, and we have people in the world today who still have that, you know, with the Kalahari Bush or the Aborigines or people who actually, they can smell the land and they can teach us how to do it. But of course, the ocular dominance and the cognitive idea of what is civilization makes us go, yeah, but they're primitive, man. They can't do nothing. And I like that, yes. Put them in the museum.
Navigators that went from the South Pacific Islands
Yeah.
to Hawaii to Alaska.
Yeah.
They can still do it.
They can-
At the start.
It's the start, yeah.
No one else can. Machine gets broken, that person is just going to die in the middle of the ocean. But that person can see
still-
where they are and do it, and it still happens. I agree. That wisdom and that knowledge is centuries, if not thousands of years old, and it's very quickly.
It's like it gives the connotation that the technology is invented by white people.
Yeah.
I mean, and then you see history, and then in my country, in Ethiopia, we count as like 1 and 0. That's how we do calculations. We put 1 with 0 because only the reminder only the 1 and 0. So, and computer counts like that. So all these things, like you find information, movie, film, you go to Egypt and you see that picture and you just running your eyes like this, and it's gonna play a movie, like a story. Something happen in the beginning, the middle, and the end. And I think I just Googled yesterday what's Ubuntu just for my surprise, and just give me
Ubuntu.
Yeah.
And
they gave me like a software name.
I know. Yeah.
And that means actually the world have no idea about Ubuntu. Such a huge philosophy as if Africa have none.
Yeah.
And I was looking for you for advice because I had research about these things, some coffee and to use for acting. And in my university, they just have no idea. That's just I've been like, you're my dream because I don't have anybody. So I was even dreaming about finding a person that can. So these things are technology actually enhancing this. But it's not, I can't blame technology, obviously. It's us who are doing this. So it's us who can sort our problems as well. There's nothing to scare because there's nothing, no agent is coming to us actually. We're just the agents ourselves with everything, I guess.
Well, in relation to what we've been talking about, the relationship in network and community and the dangers of confusing them in relation to digital practice of networking is in a way making connection. Community actually involves some of this kind of repetition and growth and staying in situations that you can evolve, etc. And especially around the dangerous word of belonging, which has various connotations politically, and but that the digital can enhance can build the network, but often it sort of stays there. It doesn't evolve and practice outwards, and how important that is in the negotiation of the way that we are informed by digital information, digital practice, etc. I just wanted to add to that.
I think it's for me, certainly, I think my aim of networking is I want to be around people. But I found that that's a presumption and very much about my age. When I talk to some of either my friends or my friends' kids who play video games or interact online, they don't have a delineation between their friends there and their friends in real life. But that's definitely my presumption and my, like, not my ignorance, but my place or age or how I grew up. And that's where I need to be careful. And I need to be careful in that I don't dismiss that online relationships are just as important to some people as physical personal relationships are. And I guess I brought it up because I think that when you say network, like come together, you meet people, and then sometimes something comes of it. But that can be digitally just as useful in a sense. But
sometimes it gets even more private and more really close. Imagine like the person you see on the street. You're not going to treat him with the same as your friend physically. You're going to be surprised.
So there's probably less things to combat in some ways on a digital platform than there are in a personal platform in a physical sense. And there's some things to be gained from a physical presence and looking someone's eyes, and it's certainly in my experience. But
I find it really interesting because, I can relate a lot to that, that sense of trying to not judge from your own experience, but it's sort of reminding me of, I think the world that is developing requires even more self-reflection to be able to make choices. So, because when I'm with that friend over there, am I exactly the same way with that person next to me? And the choice of either being with you without my phone, or being with a phone, or in connection online with someone, or in a hybrid situation, change our biological relationship. And I think the challenge that I can see, the generational challenge is to make choices, to be able to self-reflect and to be strong enough, whatever that might mean. I'm not sure what I mean here, to make a choice to either put the phone away, to integrate it, and to listen to the body, because in a way, this is the body, this is how I know what is safe. And I think that notion of safe place is really interesting when it comes to relationship and to making choices. And I'm sure it resonates in some of my students once said to me, I wish I would, I wish I could go back before Instagram. It's quite strong. You kind of go, how was it before Instagram? Like, it really changed that person to have potentially an addiction. We know those things are addictive as well. So it's
empowered. Like, to me, it's empowerment. It's where you're empowered and how you think about things.
Exactly. Where is that borderline?
I just wanted to put it back slightly to that thing of noticing that you brought up, and it's nice to hear Flick's name actually, because worked with her a bit recently. But I guess just a couple of examples that occurred to me when we're talking about sort of digital technology and how that we might use that to notice more around us. And one was quite a sort of prosaic example my partner introduced me to, which is an app which listens for birdsong, tells you what birds you're hearing around you. And I think that's particularly wonderful, because actually, although what it's giving you is quite, hard information about what a bird is and where it's found, but what I gained not as a bird fancier is a greater understanding and engagement with what was around me. And I think in some way the other apps which allow you to photograph what we might see as weeds and understand them suddenly actually take you into a much richer space in terms of how you perceive that analog world around you. So I think they're not arts examples, but I think that for me they've been really powerful examples of how we can notice more. But I think that there's increasingly an interest in using by people who are kind of guardians or gatekeepers of public space in terms of using the arts to help people and use it and within that digital technology to allow people to connect more directly to place. I mean, Zach, your example of projecting the inhabitants of Hull, on the buildings of Hull as a, this is a great case in point, and I'm sure there's lots of challenges and contradictions within that project, but also I think within the natural world, we're seeing this interest in trying to use technology in order to mediate and enhance people's movement through a physical space. And so there's a great quote by Guy Howard Davis, who was previously chief exec of the National Association of the Outstanding Areas of Outstanding Natural Beauty, which in the UK, saying we've told people all this stuff about why they should care about this or that protected environment, but actually it doesn't work. It's meaningless, and what we need is to create experiences which emotionally connect them with what's around. So I just wanted to mention that again, because I think these are really rich areas where if we can find a way beyond the kind of dichotomy of digital versus analog, am I looking at the screen or am I in the world around me, then hopefully we can create something which is a really positive synthesis of those two things and enhanced reality.
And I think we should, going back to what you were saying, and thank you for that. It's really important to continue. Is that we shouldn't underestimate the power of the young in this particular time to have solutions to this. I think we often think, oh no, we've created this technology and our children are just basically turning into blobs and they've lost their minds, and we blanket. We actually, that's not the case. There are some people who fall down the cracks, but then tell me a time in the 80s when people weren't. It's like in the 60s people were falling in the cracks. I think, and again, it goes back to what you were saying about working with people, working with people. And again, to going back to Vicky's point about developing systems that include the body as a kind of designing agent, not as something which exists in a designed object, but actually informs the designing process, both creatively and also in terms of utilities. And that the younger generation, Generation Z and Generation Alpha, solutions are coming. We need to be wise. We need to be wise to that and engage in conversation.
Great. Mindful of time, so I think we've passed 1 o'clock. We might just finish on these wise. Thank you, Olu. We'll bring it back to you guys, the young generation, and thank you very much, everybody. Contribution, ideas. It's always too short, isn't it? There's always a sense of we could go further. We hope that we can host more events. But yeah, thank you for coming to Winchester today.